The late afternoon park was almost empty when 6 teenagers surrounded an elderly black man near a weathered wooden bench. Marcus Reed was 72 years old, tall, broad-shouldered, and slightly stooped from age. He wore a gray tracksuit, clean white sneakers, and a faded navy baseball cap. His silver hair showed beneath the brim, and a neatly trimmed gray beard framed a face marked by years of experience. He carried a small paper bag filled with birdseed in one hand. For Marcus, the park had always been a place of peace. Every morning, he walked the same paved trail, stopped near the pond, fed the birds, and sat beneath the old maple trees. Some people recognized him as the quiet elderly man who always nodded politely when they passed. Nobody knew much about his past. Especially not the 6 teenagers who had been watching him for the last several minutes. Darren, 17, was the tallest of them. He wore a black hoodie and sneakers and had a habit of turning every situation into a competition. Beside him stood Malik, 16, thin and restless, while Jason, 17, kept his hands buried in his jacket pockets. The other 3 boys followed Darren's lead, laughing whenever he said something cruel. Marcus had noticed them earlier. He had hoped they would simply keep walking. Instead, Darren called out, "Hey, old man." Marcus stopped. He turned slowly. "Were you talking to me?" Darren grinned. "Who else would I be talking to?" The boys laughed. Marcus looked at them calmly. He didn't respond. Darren took a few steps forward. "You come here every day, right?" Marcus glanced toward the pond. "Most days." "Why?" Marcus shrugged. "Because I like the park." Darren looked at his friends. "Did you hear that? He likes the park." More laughter. Marcus could have walked away then, but he noticed one of the teenagers had already moved behind him. Another had stepped toward the bench. A third was standing near the trail entrance. Marcus's eyes narrowed slightly. They weren't joking anymore. They were surrounding him. He slowly placed the paper bag of birdseed on the bench. "Boys," he said, "you should go home." Darren laughed. "Why?" "Because nothing good is going to come from this." Darren stepped closer. "You threatening us?" "No." Marcus's voice remained calm. "I'm warning you." Darren's smile disappeared for a moment. Then he deliberately stepped into Marcus's personal space. "What are you going to do, old man?" Marcus looked at him. "Nothing, if you walk away." The other boys laughed again. Darren shook his head. "You know what your problem is?" Marcus waited. "You think you're somebody." Marcus glanced around at the teenagers. "No. I know exactly who I am." That answer irritated Darren. He suddenly shoved Marcus in the shoulder. Marcus stumbled backward. His heels scraped against the pavement. The teenagers erupted in laughter. Marcus slowly regained his balance. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't curse. He didn't even look angry. He simply stared at Darren. The teenager's grin weakened. "What's wrong?" Darren asked. "You going to cry?" Marcus looked at the other boys. "I'm giving you one last opportunity." Malik laughed. "Opportunity for what?" "To leave." Darren stepped forward again. Marcus watched his feet. Then his shoulders. Then his hands. There was something about the old man's gaze that Darren couldn't understand. It wasn't fear. It wasn't confusion. It was calculation. Darren shoved Marcus again. This time Marcus didn't stumble. He caught Darren's wrist. The change was immediate. Darren's eyes widened. Marcus's fingers had closed around his wrist with remarkable strength. Let go, Darren snapped. Marcus didn't squeeze harder. He didn't need to. He simply held him still. Darren tried pulling free. Nothing. The boy's confidence vanished. Let go. Marcus released him. Darren stumbled backward, clutching his wrist. The other teenagers stopped laughing. Marcus straightened his jacket. Go home. Darren stared at him. For the first time, he looked uncertain. You got lucky, he muttered. Marcus almost smiled. No, son. He picked up the bag of birdseed. You did. The teenagers exchanged confused looks. Marcus turned away. But Darren couldn't accept being embarrassed in front of his friends. Hey! Marcus stopped. Darren stepped toward him again. Marcus slowly turned his head. The expression on his face had changed. The gentle old man who had been feeding birds moments earlier seemed to have disappeared. For just 1 second, something much older and much more formidable appeared in his eyes. Darren froze. He didn't know why. He didn't know who Marcus Reed was. He didn't know that decades earlier, thousands of people had screamed that man's name from stadium seats. He didn't know that Marcus had once stood beneath blinding arena lights wearing boxing gloves, facing heavyweight fighters who were considered nearly impossible to defeat. And he certainly didn't know that the elderly man standing quietly in front of him had once been a heavyweight champion. Marcus looked at the 6 teenagers one final time. I'm not going to fight you, he said. Darren swallowed. Why? Marcus turned toward the path. Because I've spent my whole life learning when a fight is worth having. Then he began walking away. The boys stood there silently. But Darren's pride wouldn't let the moment end. He looked at his friends. Then at Marcus's retreating back. And made the mistake that would change everything. Get him. The 6 teenagers rushed forward, at once. Marcus heard their footsteps before he turned around. He didn't run. He simply stopped beside the park bench and looked over his shoulder. Darren was coming first, followed by Malik and Jason. The others spread out behind them, convinced that 6 against 1 elderly man made them unbeatable. Get out of here! Darren shouted. Marcus turned fully. Stop! His voice wasn't loud. But something about it made Malik slow down. Darren didn't. He grabbed Marcus by the shoulder. Marcus moved instantly. He stepped sideways, caught Darren's arm, and redirected his momentum. Darren stumbled past him and nearly fell against the bench. The other boys stopped. Nobody laughed this time. Marcus released Darren and took 1 step backward. I'm not trying to hurt any of you, he said. Walk away. Darren's face burned with embarrassment. You think you're tough? Marcus shook his head. No. I think you're making a mistake. Darren charged again. Marcus waited until the last possible second before stepping aside. Darren passed him. Marcus lightly touched his shoulder and guided him away, causing the teenager to lose balance and drop onto the grass. The entire encounter lasted less than 2 seconds. Jason stared. How did he do that? Marcus heard him. He turned toward the boy. Experience. Darren scrambled to his feet. His friends were beginning to realize that this wasn't going the way they had imagined. The elderly man wasn't fighting them. He wasn't punching them. He wasn't even trying to intimidate them. He was simply avoiding every attack with movements that seemed strangely effortless. Darren charged again. This time Marcus raised 1 hand. Enough. Darren stopped several feet away. Marcus looked directly at him. You're 17. Darren frowned. So? So you have your entire life ahead of you. Marcus's expression softened. Don't ruin it because you wanted to impress your friends for 5 minutes. For a moment, Darren said nothing. Then Malik whispered, Darren, let's go. Darren turned sharply. You scared? Malik looked at Marcus. Then at Darren. I'm not stupid. That comment made the other boys uncomfortable. Marcus noticed something else. One of the teenagers, a smaller boy named Eli, had moved farther away from the group. He wasn't laughing anymore. His eyes kept shifting between Marcus and Darren. Marcus pointed toward the trail. You too. Eli immediately started walking. Hey! Darren shouted. Eli stopped. Darren looked furious. But Eli shook his head. I'm leaving. He walked away. That was when Marcus noticed a park security officer standing near the far entrance. The officer had witnessed enough to understand what was happening. He began walking toward them. Darren saw him too. Let's go, Jason said. But Darren's anger had completely taken over. He looked at Marcus. Then at the approaching officer. Then back at Marcus. This isn't over. Marcus sighed. Yes, it is. Darren reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. He pointed the camera at Marcus. I'm recording you. Marcus stared at the phone. Go ahead. Darren looked surprised. You don't care? Marcus shook his head. Not even a little. The security officer arrived. What's going on here? Nobody answered. Darren immediately changed his attitude. Nothing. We're just talking. The officer looked at Marcus. Marcus calmly replied, They approached me while I was walking. I asked them to leave. They chose not to. Darren interrupted. He attacked me. The officer looked at him. Really? Darren pointed toward his wrist. He grabbed me. Marcus didn't deny it. I caught his wrist after he shoved me twice. The officer's expression became serious. Did you shove him? Darren remained silent. Did you? Darren looked away. The officer turned to the other boys. Anyone want to tell me what happened? Silence. Marcus could have embarrassed them. He could have described every insult, every shove, every attempt to surround him. Instead, he simply said, they made a poor decision. The officer looked at Marcus with confusion. You don't want to file a complaint? Marcus shook his head. Not unless they come back. Darren smirked. He thought Marcus was afraid. But the security officer noticed something Darren didn't. Marcus's posture. The balance. The way he stood. The officer stared at his hands for several seconds. Sir, he said slowly, have we met before? Marcus smiled faintly. I don't think so. The officer frowned. You look familiar. Marcus picked up his paper bag from the bench. People tell me that sometimes. Darren laughed. Maybe because every old man looks the same. The officer immediately turned toward him. Watch your mouth. Marcus didn't react. He simply started walking toward the pond. But Jason wasn't looking at Marcus anymore. He was staring at the old man's hands. There was something unusual about them. The knuckles were thick. The fingers were scarred. And despite Marcus's age, his hands looked powerful. Jason suddenly remembered something his grandfather had once told him. A famous heavyweight fighter from decades ago had hands exactly like that. He had seen an old photograph hanging in his grandfather's garage. A young black man standing inside a boxing ring. Broad shoulders, Same jaw. Same eyes. Jason's face went pale. He looked at Marcus. Then at his friends. Wait. Darren rolled his eyes. What? Jason pointed toward Marcus. I think I know who he is. Marcus stopped walking. Slowly, he turned around. Jason swallowed. Marcus Reed? The park became silent. Marcus's expression changed. Darren stared at him. Who? Jason couldn't take his eyes off the elderly man. My grandfather used to talk about him. Marcus said nothing. Jason continued. He was a heavyweight champion. Darren laughed nervously. No way. Marcus looked toward the pond. For the first time, his face carried a trace of sadness. That was a long time ago. Darren stared at him. The security officer's eyes widened. And suddenly, 6 teenagers understood that the quiet old man they had cornered wasn't helpless at all. He had simply chosen not to show them what he could do.